So as we go throughout this course here, keep in mind that I'm going to be doing a lot of demonstration. And at some point, you're going to want to do this on your own. Don't worry about it right now because I want you to listen and pay attention. I do record the session, so if you miss part of it, you can always play it back later. Or if you just want to play it back later for your own personal, learning, you have the ability to do that. I also have transcription turned on, so I'll have Copilot generate a transcribed version, kind of a summary of what we talked about here for each session. But definitely try to make it for the session, so that way, if you have questions, you can be here for it. All right, so at some point, once you're ready, which is probably going to be after today, if you don't already have an Azure environment, because you're going to need to be able to play with this before you actually prepare for your exam. If you don't do it, how are you going to pass the exam? You got to know what you're doing. So in here, Microsoft does provide the ability for you to create a free Azure account. So if you use whatever search engine you want to use and you type in free Azure account in the browser, whether it's Bing, Google, whatever you want to use, normally the very first result is this one right here in almost every search engine. And this is where you can create a free Azure account. Now, with this free Azure account, it's good for 1 year. So it's good for 1 year. For the first 30 days, you get 200, I call them Azure bucks. It's Azure credit, but I call them Azure bucks. You get 200 Azure bucks that you can use to deploy whatever you want, as long as you don't go over the $200. Now, after the first month, for month 11 through 12, month 2 through 12, I should say, you still get free Azure services, but you don't get 200 Azure bucks a month to use. We give you a very limited environment, and here's what I mean. You can deploy anything you want, virtual machines, databases, networks, but we limit the scale or the size of the resource that you can build. So let me give you an example. For the first month, when you got the $200 credit, you can build a 50 processor virtual machine if you want to. It comes out of your $200, but you can do that. But after this first month, for each month after that, like for virtual machines, we're going to let you build like a single processor, single gig of RAM type VM. So you can play with it and log in and do whatever. We're not going to give you the ability to build a behemoth machine, if you will. So for the 11 month 2 through 11, you can still deploy things. So use this as you're preparing, as you're training, and so forth. Now, this is kind of a modified version of our official AI 102 course. I just put the link in chat for you. I would recommend you save the link to a Word document or in your browser, wherever, but definitely save that, because this is going to cover all the material that's going to be covered on your exam. So this course syllabus that you'll see here on that link that I just put in lists everything that's part of the course. Now, as part of this program, we're not going to cover everything individually. Matter of fact, we're probably going to talk about this one here, which is getting started with AI, and we're going to get into the OpenAI one, which is developing solutions with OpenAI, which is somewhere in my list here, which I can't find now, but it's in here somewhere. So there it is right there, the last one, develop generative AI solutions with Azure OpenAI servers. So that's what we're going to cover, but I do want to touch on all the other technologies as we go throughout this discussion here over the next 8 weeks, just so you have a general understanding of it. And remember, on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time from 12 to 1, I have office hours. There's a separate Teams link for that. You can click on that, and you can jump on and ask me questions. We have discussions, whatever. And that's for an hour also. All right, so with that being said, let's get started with AI. So this is the Azure portal. If you've never seen it before, once you've created a free Azure account, you go to portal.azure.com, and it'll take you in here. And when you first get in here, you'll be on a default page similar to this, where you can you'll see a bunch of stuff on the left and so forth. The service that we're going to be focusing on in this is the AI service. And up here at the search bar, this is where you can search for all the various technologies you can deploy. Over here on the left, right here, are some of the more, favorites, some of the common technologies that we have. But there's hundreds of different Azure technologies that you can deploy. One of those being AI. So if you go up here and just type AI, or you can type in OpenAI, which is another popular one. Regardless of what you do, if you type in AI, it'll take you to this page, which is the Azure AI services. Now, these used to be called cognitive services, but we've changed that. So now everything falls under the umbrella of AI services. And within here, there's a bunch of different ones. The one we're going to focus on in our discussions here over the next few weeks is going to be OpenAI. This is when you think of AI, when you hear about it on the internet, and when you think of things like Copilot by Microsoft, that's what this kind of is underneath the hood. But we have other technologies that are AI driven, like search capabilities. You can search images or documents, computer vision. So now we can look at, again, images. We've got a face API and custom vision where we can do, face recognition and technologies like that. Speech, this is where you can talk to something and it can synthesize voice and so forth. Language, if you want to convert languages from one language to another, then you can do that. And then we have all these other technologies that are in here. And when you're developing solutions within your organization, or if you're a consultant or something like that, or if you're just trying to learn this, you'll probably use a few of these together. You don't just use one. You'll normally use, a couple of them mixed and matched together. And that's another discussion for another block of instruction that we may have in the future. But what we're going to focus on here is Azure OpenAI. Now, in order to understand this, there's one key point you need to remember. Before you can deploy anything in Azure, you've got to have what's called a subscription. So a subscription is essentially, we'll call it an Azure subscription. By the way, I've been doing IT 32, 33 years, and my typing sucks. I should have accidentally learned how to type by now. I'm a terrible typer. But so we have what's called Azure subscriptions. Azure subscriptions are important because this is how you pay for everything that you deploy in Microsoft's cloud. Everything. You cannot deploy anything without a subscription. And if you go up here in a search and just type in subscription, you'll see that I have one active subscription currently, which is right here. So, and it tells me it's active right here on the right. So I know that I can build things. If you don't have an active subscription and you try to build something, it'll bring up a window basically saying, hey, you need to create a subscription. So that's the first thing that you have to do before you do anything else, whether it's AI or other technologies that we have. Now, within here, we're going to focus on OpenAI. And regardless of which of the technologies that you want to deploy here for AI, the process is pretty much going to work the same way. And the way you do it is step one, you've got to create an instance of it. So let me kind of give you an idea. Let's go back to our whiteboard and kind of look at how this works. So here's my Azure. So here's my Azure environment. Within my Azure environment, I'm going to have one or more subscriptions. And a company may have more than one subscription if they want to break out billing. Like the sales department may have a subscription for all the salesy stuff, the engineering department, the marketing department, the research department. So if you need to break out cost, you can have different subscriptions for each one. There's other ways of doing it, but that's kind of the easiest way to do it. Now, within that, let's see here. So within that, what we do is we have to deploy an instance of AI, regardless of which of these it is. So if we go back in here and let me close some of these here. I've got way too many things open. So I've got to deploy an instance of one of these. So let's walk through that here. So we're going to go in here, we're going to select create. And in here, it's going to ask me, number one, how do I pay for it? That's going to be the first question you always get when you deploy Azure resources. How do you pay for it? Number two is where are you going to put it for management purposes, resource groups. Think of a resource group as almost like a folder. Why do we create multiple folders on computers? because we want to put common files in the same folder. We want to manage permissions at the folder level. Think of a resource group as that. I can put a bunch of resources in one resource group, and then I can assign permissions or manage it that way. So I'm just going to pick my AI one that I have here. And then geographically, where do I want to deploy this resource? In Azure, as well as other cloud providers, we call this a region. Now, Microsoft has, I think, going on 70 regions now for where you can deploy things. And let's see, we used to have a map in here. It's in here somewhere, but I'm going to cheat here for the sake of time and simplicity. I'm going to go to images, and you'll see examples. Now, the maps may be a little bit outdated, but I want to give you an idea. So, oops, that's a terrible one to use here. Yeah, this is a better one here. So let's open this up in a new window. Let's zoom in a little bit. There we go. Okay. Oh, that didn't work out well. Ixnay the zooming. But a region is a geographical location somewhere on the planet. It's basically a location where Microsoft has one or more data centers. And what we do, I want to find one that's, we'll use this one here for now. It just got smaller on me. Oh, here we go. So we'll use this. Again, keep in mind, this is definitely outdated because we're in the almost 70 regions here. But each one of these, like here, this little bubble is West US 2. That's one region. And in that region, there may be multiple data centers. So when I go in and I deploy my environment, I tell Microsoft where at globally do I want to deploy this service. And this is pretty cool because if you think about it, before we had cloud, let's say I'm a global company and I want to deploy something in Europe, let's say France. In the old days, I would have to fly someone out to France, either build a building or buy space in the building, put racks in the building, get internet, set up everything just so I can make it work, which takes months and in some cases years before you can do it. With cloud, I can literally deploy a service or an entire infrastructure in a few minutes. So that's one of the neat things about this. So we're going to put this one, we'll pick a different region. We'll do West US. So we'll do West US. And then the name of my instance. So we're going to call this Microsoft Innovation. So MI, Microsoft Innovation, and then class. There we go, MI class. And then the pricing tier. The pricing tier, oops, and I pick a region that not every region supports it. There we go. So we'll do West US. The pricing tier. The pricing tier gets into performance capabilities, how many requests we can have. We'll get into pricing later on. So I'm going to pick this location, and at this point, I'm done. I can literally just click next, 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 and it's going to validate it. And then I'm going to create it. So what is happening right now behind the scenes is within my Azure environment, there's an instance of OpenAI in here. There's an instance of OpenAI being deployed within my environment. In this case, the name of that instance was MI class. That's what we called it. So that's the first thing that's happening. Any questions at this point? Any questions?
So is an instance kind of like a virtual machine or no?
Think of it as a virtual machine. I have a physical box with virtual machines running on top of it. Think of the Microsoft OpenAI service as the physical machine, and think of let's go back here to think of each one of these, just for simplicity's sake. Each one of these instances is like a VM. It's not a VM, but conceptually, there's a bigger and then smaller subsets.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
And just like with virtualization, every VM has its own resources. And when you deploy AI services, like I have here, I've got what, 5 of them listed. This is like 5 separate instances or services that I can use. So let's take a look. I just created this one called MI class. So let's go ahead and click on it. This is my instance. Now this is important. Here's why. Because what's going to happen in the real world is, as a developer or someone in your organization is going to create an app, and that app's going to do something. I'll give you a perfect example. When you go to copilot.microsoft.com, when you go to Copilot, this is Microsoft's public AI service, if you will. When you go here, this right here is a website. Behind that website is the technology that makes this little box down here work. If I type something in here, if I ask, what is the diameter of the Earth? Or if I say, write me a poem or troubleshoot some code, and I put in this box and submit it, what's actually happening is behind the scenes, it's being sent to Microsoft's public AI instance. So as a developer, you can create your own internal application portal if you want to, or you can use the app for whatever. Now that app is going to have code. Whatever that app does, it's going to have some code sitting in here. So what's going to happen is you're going to have either users or administrators or whoever, they're going to be sitting on their computers, phones, tablets, whatever they're using, and they're going to connect to this application, normally through a URL. Nowadays, we do things through URLs, but it doesn't have to be. It could be an app on a phone. Doesn't matter. But they're going to connect to the application, and they're going to do something. Now, I'll give you a perfect example. My wife, she has apps on her phone that will she'll take a picture and it'll modify her picture to make her look like she's older, younger. She's in the West. She's from the Shakespearean time. What's happening behind the scenes is there's an image generation tool that uses probably some type of AI technology behind the scenes to create that. So your user is going, or whoever's going to use the app is going to connect here, and they're going to submit a request. Here's a picture, convert it for me. Or, hey, I need you to write me a poem, and then the application needs to write a poem for them. So what the app will then do is, behind the scenes, it will make a connection to that instance of the AI service. So if I go back to my portal here, technically speaking, I can have one app connecting here, a separate app connecting here, another app connecting here, another one here, and another one here. I can have different ones connecting to different things. Let me give you a real world example. This right here, Melinda AI site. So my wife is a dermatologist. She's a doctor. And she complained to me once that, she ends up coming home late from work because at the end of the day, she's on the computer writing patient notes, and writing all that stuff out it takes time. So what I did is I created an instance of AI for her, created a custom website for her called Melinda AI site, that now she can go to that website, which is secure, just type in basic information and tell AI, write this into a note for me. And it will literally write into a note. She'll copy it and paste it into the hospital application. So that's a perfect example. I basically created a private Copilot portal page for her to do that with. Why? Because I want my wife home. It sucks when she comes home late. So that could be an example of this application. Now, this application needs to be able to talk to this instance of AI in a secure manner. And we'll dive more into the coding aspect of it later on as we go through these iterations this week. But I want to kind of give you a high-level example of how you use this all. Then we'll get in the weeds. So what I need in my application code to tell the code to point here. When a request comes in from a user, that user sends that request in, the application doesn't do the number crunching or the logic behind it. The application will send that request to the AI instance. The AI instance then, because we have machine learning, large language models, so let's call this the Microsoft AI infrastructure. So behind the scenes, what you don't see as a customer is the Microsoft AI infrastructure. So what happens is when the user, admin, whoever submits the request to the app then forwards whatever data it needs to the AI service. This then sends it behind the scenes to Microsoft. Microsoft's infrastructure will then come back with a response, send that response to the application. The code in the application says, okay, I've just received the response, and the application does something with it. In this case, the application may manipulate it a little bit, or it may just send the response back to the user. So that's kind of the high level workflow. So you need to create this instance in order for it to work, because you cannot connect directly to Microsoft's backend. We don't provide access to that. There's an intermediary, your instance. Now, there's another reason why you have to create that intermediary, that instance that you create, is because after your application sends that data to your instance sends it to Microsoft spits it back out to you and sends it back to your application. There's another process that happens. We have to bill you for that. With all of the AI services, there is obviously a cost component. We're not a $3 trillion company because everything is free. We're going to bill you somehow for that technology. So what happens is after the infrastructure generates your response and is sent back to your instance will then let your subscription know, hey, we're going to charge, Bobbie 10 cents for this request or whatever it may be. I'm just throwing a random number out. So your subscription keeps track of that and then eventually either bills your credit card or there's an invoicing process or something where we send an invoice to your company. So the AI services in Microsoft, what they do is they receive the request from your application. They receive the request. Microsoft then takes the request and does something with it. In the example of let's say translation, it'll take a request. Let's say a request comes in Thai. So my user, let's get rid of some of this stuff here. I've got a lot of lines going on here. Let's get rid of some of this here. So I just got rid of my person. But what will happen is, let's say the user is writing in Thai and they want to translate it. They would send that request to the application. In your code, basically, there will be something that says translate from Thai to, let's say, English. Okay? So something in your code will say translate that request from Thai to English. That Thai information, that Thai request, the text, whatever it may be, is then sent to your AI service. The AI service sends it to Microsoft. We then convert it from Thai to English. We then send that English version back to you, and then you send that English version back to whoever the application user is. And of course, we then tell the subscription, hey, add that to the bill. If it's facial recognition, the same process. This is the intermediary that you need. Make sense? So now the question becomes, how do I get my application to talk to a specific instance? Remember, let's get rid of some of this stuff here again. Because like in my lab environment, as you saw, I've got multiple instances. So I've got, an instance there. I've got another AI instance here. I've got another AI instance sitting here. How does this application know to talk to this instance? And maybe I have another application sitting over here. How does it know to talk to this instance and, a third application? By the way, my drawings are atrocious. How does that third application know to talk to this instance? The way you do that, and this is where the creation process comes into play. When I built my instance, which is called MI class right here, now that it's built, when I click on it, you have something called a key and an endpoint. So each one of my instances, and I've got 5 of them here, if I click on each one and go to key and endpoint, it has a different key and an endpoint, a URL that it uses. So in your application code, at a minimum, you're going to have to put the key and the endpoint of the instance of your service. That's how your application knows exactly which of these instances I have over here to submit the request to. So that's how it works behind the scenes. So one of the other reasons why we create multiple instances is to generate these keys and endpoints. Now, you're going to notice, and again, as we go further and further along in this over the next 8 weeks here, we're going to keep building upon what we're talking about here. Each instance, and this is pretty much anything in Azure. Anything in Azure that gives you keys, you're always going to get two keys, key 1 and key 2. It doesn't matter which key you use in your code. They both work. The reason we give you two keys is, let's say, because one, we always look at security. And in your code, maybe I use this key right now, but after time, you want to change your key, it's like changing a password. Periodically, you want to change your password. So periodically, you want to change your key. So let's say you're using this, and then 3 months later, you want to change it. You can just literally change your code to use this key. Now this key is being used. This key is no longer being used. So now I can reset and regenerate a new key. And then in 3 months, we get rid of this key. We start using this key again, and then we reset key number 2. So it's a way to easily give you the ability to alternate keys within there without breaking your application. If we just gave you one key, technically speaking, when you switch keys, there could be some downtime. And in all services, we'll give you multiple keys, but we only normally give you one endpoint. So this is the connection. Notice the name of the URL that we're using. It's mi class, which is the same name as my instance of ai.openai.azure.com. So in your code, which we'll dive into as we start building on this, that is what you would use. My second application, so if I go to, let's say, AI demo, I go to this instance of AI, the keys here are going to be different. And notice the endpoint is different. It's AI, which is the same name as this, ai102demo.openai.azure.com. So this is how you programmatically submit your request to the service. And only when the request comes in, only the request that has the correct key and the correct endpoint is serviced. This stops random people from submitting requests to your instance, driving up your bill. Plus, it's for security purposes. Any questions on that? Any questions? Make sense?
Yes.
Cool. So that's one of the big things that you want to consider. That's why we create the instance of AI. For billing purposes, for security, because you get your own key and endpoint. And there's a third reason. And the third reason is because of resource limitation. Right now, OpenAI, of all of our AI services that you see listed here on the left, let's get rid of this. All of these services listed here on the left, OpenAI is probably the youngest one of them. It's the least, let's call it least mature, because it's only been out for about 1.5 years or so. We've really publicized it. Actually, I think earlier this year is January is when it really came out. So because of that, there are some limitations when it comes to what regions you can deploy it in, what locations you can deploy it in, as well as the amount of resources you can use. So besides of security, the other reason, and billing, the other reason why you create multiple instances of the AI service is because of limitations. Let's say, and we'll get into the limitations in more detail later on in the course, but let's say this instance right here, which is sitting in this region, let's say hypothetically, it can only support 100 requests per second, meaning someone can only send 100 requests per second. What if I have an application that needs to send 1,000 requests per second? By having one instance, it won't meet that. What will happen is it'll send 1,000, but AI is only going to process 100 at a time, which could cause latency. So I have a few options: deployed in a different region that supports more, or create multiple instances of the service. So now I can kind of load balance and things like that. So there's there's other things that you can do. There's other reasons why you deploy that instance. All right, so now let's go back to my instance here. So here's my instance. Within here, there are my keys. By default, almost everything in Microsoft is encrypted. So what this encryption means is this. The communication process between your application and Microsoft is encrypted. How is it encrypted? It's encrypted in transit. How do we know that? Well, if I go in here and look at the endpoint, notice it's an HTTPS. So by default, all communication between your applications and your instance are going to be encrypted using TLS encryption, which is the strongest real encryption that you have publicly available nowadays. So it's encrypted, what we call in transit. When the request is sent, it's encrypted. Now, anything that's stored locally by Microsoft, which is normally for a very temporary basis, and we'll talk again, we'll dig into a lot of this as we go throughout the course over the next 8 weeks. But what about stuff that's being stored on Microsoft's side temporarily? That's called data at rest encryption. And that's what this encryption option here is for. So by default, unless you change the default configuration, it's going to be encrypted using Microsoft generated keys. Now, these keys are unique to this instance. I've got 5 different instances of OpenAI running. Each of those instances has a different key. It's not one key for everything. Every instance gets its own key. So that's the first option. Let Microsoft generate the key and encrypt it for me. I will tell you right now, unless you have a good reason to change it, keep it that way. It's going to make your life a lot simpler. Here's why. If Microsoft generates a key, which is unique to your environment, then Microsoft is responsible for backing it up. Microsoft is responsible for changing the key if it needs to be changed, cycled through, and so forth. There may be instances, let's say you're in healthcare or banking or somewhere, or even your company requires it. Usually it deals with government regulations, where the data must be encrypted at rest with your own key. You can't use a third-party vendor's key, which Microsoft would be a third party in your case. So if you have compliance reasons or just company policies, you can actually use your own key to encrypt the data at rest versus using a system generator one. The benefit here is it's your key, you control it. The downside to using your key is it's your key, you have to control it. If someone were to go in your organization and delete that key and you can't recover it, then all the data that was encrypted with that is now gone, which most of it's very temporary anyway, but still, it's gone. It's bye-bye. So only use your own key if you have to. If not, go to sleep better at night knowing that Microsoft's protecting you and you don't have to deal with backing it up, deleting it accidentally, and so forth. Any questions on that? So that is the deployment process. Now, how can I use this? Every instance, and we're focusing specifically on OpenAI, every instance of OpenAI has its own custom portal. And we call that the Azure OpenAI Studio. So on the main page of your instance of AI, you'll see here, explore and deploy. There's a studio, and what the studio gives you the ability to do is test and play around with it. Now, are you going to use a studio for your production application? No. But what I could do is I could use a studio. So let's say, let me give you an example here. Let's say my application is going to receive requests, like Copilot. Maybe my application looks like this. Whoops, where is it at here? Maybe my application looks like this. I've got my own internal in-house Copilot deployment, we'll say. And what I want is when somebody goes in here and types something. So let me give you an example. Tell me a 6-line poem. And by the way, luckily for you, Copilot understands misspellings, or I should say lucky for me. So here you go. So here's a short poem. There it is right there that I have. So notice here, It says, in the garden of dreams where wishes bloom, stars whisper secrets to the moon, and so forth. So that's nice. But what if I want this? I want to be able to tell me a 6-line poem in, and by the way, my typing sucks, so forgive me, but make it more Shakespearean. Notice here, the same request with just a minor modification. Upon the morn, where light doth gently break, the flowers bloom. So now it's more in a Shakespearean type tone. What if you want, so in this scenario, I told the AI, write me a poem and make it sound like you're Shakespeare. What if you had an application where you wanted users to be able to submit a request like write me a poem, and you want it to automatically respond in a certain way? Let me give you a real world example. Let's say you had an application like similar to Copilot for, let's say you're a vacation planning company, and you want people to be able to go in here and ask a question. And normally, the people that are asking questions to vacation planning companies are people that are planning a vacation. And I don't know about you guys, but I've never been unhappy and miserable while I was planning a vacation. That's one of the happiest times in your life. Yay, I just got back from a vacation a couple weeks ago for a month in Asia. I wasn't disgruntled and upset. Man, I got to make this vacation. No, I was excited. So if I'm a vacation planning company and I have an application similar to this, I want to make sure that when people ask questions in there, that the response is in a very happy tone. What I don't want is somebody to say, hey, tell me about Thailand. We're looking to go. And it comes back in a very robotic response. No, I want the response to the person asking about Thailand to be exciting. Like, oh my God, you'll love Thailand. It's got rivers and temples and the greatest food, and the nightlife is, you want the tone to be exciting. So how do you do that? In the portal, let's go back in here. In the right here, the studio, you can play around with how you want the responses to be generated. You can test it out. And then once you've tested it out and you find the perfect fit for what you're looking for, you can take those settings and put them into your code. So the OpenAI Studio is a test bed for putting requests in or data in, and then looking at what the output is. And do I need to tweak it? Let me give you another example. With going back to Copilot here. Copilot has a limitation on how large the request and the output can be. So let me give you an example. I'll get to you in 1 second there. Right here. Up to 2,000. So my request can have up to 2,000, which we'll talk about what that is a little bit later. So if I were to go in here, let me give you an example here. I've got some code. If I paste that code in there, let's say I paste it in there twice. Whoops, that's terrible. Notice here, character limit exceeded. So with OpenAI, I can define what is the maximum amount of characters somebody can put in the request. And I can also define what is the maximum size of the response, the output. Tangy, you have a question? I saw your hand.
Yeah, so for the OpenAI Studio, is that also using credits as well? Or is it almost like a sandbox where it's not using credits?
Oh, we're going to charge you. I've got kids to put through college. I can't give you anything for free. Microsoft can't afford to give you anything for free as long as I have kids to put through college.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
And we're going to talk about, I'm actually going to teach you, we'll probably get into it in next week's session. I'm going to explain to you and teach you and demonstrate to you exactly how billing is done, how you can break down and see how much something is going to cost. But yes, there is a cost for using the sandbox environment, the studio.
Okay.
Remember, the answer is always going to be yes when it comes to cost, as long as I have kids to put through college. So remember that.
That makes sense.
If we start giving away stuff for free, I'm going to be sending a strongly worded email to corporate like, dude, I got kids to put through college. Stop giving away things for free. so, so in the studio, I can define things like what is the maximum input request size? What I don't want, I mean, I could technically do that, but what I wouldn't want is somebody to put a request in there that's like 10,000 books in size, 5 million characters, if you will. I mean, could you theoretically do that? Possibly. Technically, you can't, but let's say you could. But if you were to submit a request with 5 million characters in it, you're going to get charged for that. Oh, and then when the AI responds back with whatever the response is going to be, you get charged for that also. So I may want to limit, when somebody submits a request to our hotel, our vacation planning website where they ask a question about Thailand, I may in the system say respond back in a happy tone and limit the response to. We don't use characters, but I'm going to use characters as an example. Limit the response to 500 characters in the response because I get charged for each character. It's not per character, but in my example here, we'll use that. That way I can control cost also. Because if I don't put a limit on there, somebody can submit a request to my vacation planning site that's 1,000 characters long, and then in the request, the AI responds back with a 10,000 character response because of what they asked. They're asking for so much stuff, and now I'm getting charged the 1,000 characters for the request and the 10,000 characters of the response, plus some other backend things as a customer. So you're going to want to control little things like that. And that's where being able to create your own custom instance of OpenAI allows you to do that. Any other questions? So now let's do a little teaser here. Once we have our instance built, we're going to go to the playground, which is the OpenAI Studio. There's a couple different ways you can get there. You can go to openai.azure.com. We changed it up here. Or the other way, and I'll find the link here. I always forget what it is. Oh, it's OAI. So oai.azure.com. If you go to oai.azure.com or you just click the link here, it takes you to the same place, which is this right here. This is the OpenAI Studio. This is your playground area. Matter of fact, we even say the word playground right there. So you can play around with the settings. Tweak the setting here, submit a request, see what the output is. Let's tweak the setting a little bit more, submit a request, here's the output, and so forth. So you can do that in the AI playground. And next week, we're going to go through this. We're going to talk about, what are all these different settings? How do you set them up? We're going to talk about two key things. We're going to talk about the various models that are out there and deployments, which you see right here. I don't have any deployments, which I'll walk you through next week. But we're going to go and we're going to talk about what the different models are. We're going to talk about how to build a deployment. And then once we have those two things completed, then we're going to go in and we're going to chat. We're going to look at all the various settings that we have when it comes to chat. Other things we're going to look at. Notice here in my OpenAI Studio, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different instances. Those 5 instances, if I go back to the Microsoft Azure portal, are the exact same 5 instances I have here because they're all under my account, my login here. So let me give you a little teaser here on how this would work. So I could go in here. We're going to change it. And I've already got a deployment model set up for it, which I'll talk to you how to do it next week. But I can go in here and say, tell me about Harry Potter books, which I have no clue about Harry Potter. And this is me testing it. So I submit a request and it came back with a response. If I'm happy with this, I can put this information in my code, the settings for this in my code, and then we're good to go. But notice here, the response is a series of 7 fantasy novels written by British author J.K. Rowling. The books chronicle the life of a young wizard. Notice how very boring it is? I'm going to teach you next week, how do we tweak that? How do we change that? So instead of having to tell AI, hey, respond like a 19-year-old kid or like a Shakespearean person, how do I programmatically make that happen by default? So every time somebody submits a request, the output always sounds like Shakespeare. Or I like to use the example, a 19-year-old hippie from California. If I wanted to sound like that, where, you use the word dude and awesome and groovy and things like that in your response. Or do I want it to be boring? It's, in some cases, you want it to be just straight to the point. I don't care about all the frills and in the tone of the response and so forth. Other things, I put in a request here for six character or six words. The response is a good sized paragraph here. Is that too much? Is it not enough? How do we tweak that to get a better response in how we do things? So those are the things that we're going to be covering in next week's session. So we've done the easy part, I would say, if you will, which is go into the Microsoft portal, the Azure portal, search for, just type in AI. It doesn't matter what AI you select. We're going to do AI search. It takes you to the AI services portal, which is here. We just went into OpenAI. We've gone in and created an instance. Now, to wrap things up, let me kind of explain some other differences between the technologies. OpenAI is also referred to as generative AI. And what I mean by generative AI is OpenAI can literally create things from scratch. I give you an example. I said, write me a poem, a 6-line poem, and it wrote me, just pulled out of thin air, 6 lines of information. You may have heard the term machine learning before, which is a lot of times you hear machine learning used with AI. The difference between generative AI and machine learning, one is the underlying technology, but that not worrying about that. The difference is the data set. With machine learning, it can only give you an answer based on things that it's read. So let me give you an example. If I asked OpenAI, hey, give me the ratings of all hotels in New York City, and what do you recommend? It'll come back and give ratings and come back with a recommendation. If I took and used machine learning to do the same thing, I would first have to load every hotel in New York into a document or some type of storage location, have machine learning scan it and learn about it, and then have it give me a response based off of that small subset of information. If I ask it about anything else besides those hotels, it can't. With OpenAI, if I said, hey, tell me about the hotels in New York, oh, and by the way, for each of the hotels, give me the price and, has the president stayed there before? So now it can extract and pull all of that information and give me that information. OpenAI can write me a poem. OpenAI can create a picture from scratch, which I'll demonstrate next week. I can say, create a picture of a frog drinking a margarita sitting on the beach with a volcano in the background and a pterodactyl flying in the sky. And it will create an image for me from scratch based off of that. Umer, yes, you have a question?
Hi, Bobbie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, the question is how far back the data is going to be when you do the search.
It
How far
depends.
back?
It depends on the model. It can be anywhere from a few years to a few months ago. And next week, when we get into the models themselves, you'll see that. I'll give you all the documentation and show you that. So it depends on which model. If you use an older model, you're going to get old, meaning if you use an older model, you're going to get data up to, let's say, 2022. So if I ask the older model who won the Super Bowl in 2024, January or February 2024, it'll come back and tell me, I'm sorry, I can't predict the future. But if I use one of the newer models and ask who won the Super Bowl in 2024, depending on when the sampling was, it can tell me, whoever won. Was it the Kansas City Chiefs, I think, who won it last year. Does that make sense? So it all depends on the model.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
But I will give you, I'll give you the link, and we'll dig into that when we talk about the models next week. All right, guys. So what do you think? You're enjoying it? You think this is going to be a fun little thing, fun little class? I'm going to stop the recording here.